There we go.
There we are. Hello, everybody. How are we all? Looking forward to the read. Chris Rock is
There you go.
hosting SNL, so I'm away. That's fine, Melanie. You are very welcome, Ren.
I mean, I don't blame you. Fuck, this is like the first time he's hosted anything since Will Smith knocked him out.
Yeah, he's been kind of MIA for a hot minute. Dan, welcome. Welcome.
Hey, Dan.
Oh, hello, Jackson. Hello, big man. As you can tell, Jackson has filled out quite a lot.
What were we on 4?
No, we're on 5. Pretty sure we're on 5.
Just getting things set up.
Have an orange cat for your pleasure. While we get to the next bit of the story that we need to get to. We only have... so, yes, the plan is to finish. The plan is to finish the story tonight. So, we shall see how that goes. I think the next stave will probably take... Oh, Melanie said 4 and 5. Okay, so the next one is 4. You were right, I was wrong. The next one is a little long. But then the last...
Oh, Jackson. Done.
Sir, you must wait.
Hyperlink.
You're asking me.
I know if you were the one who saw it.
Oh, Ren, thank you very much.
Oh,
That's
thank you,
awesome.
Ren.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas as well.
Merry Christmas. What does Scrooge say at the end? Merry
No.
Christmas.
No, Tiny Tim says, God bless us, everyone. That he does. But yes, Ren, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Go to the top of the...
There.
Okay.
There.
Okay. We made it. So, usually we do a lot of meandering discussion and tangents and blah, blah, blah. But I say we just get into it.
I'm down with that.
Let's just start this thing. All right, here we go. I have to pet him now. I'm sorry. I must read. Okay, here we go. Stave 4. The Last of the Spirits. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and misery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night, and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt that it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition, and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It thrilled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghosts of the future!" he exclaimed. "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on! The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit!" The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them and encompass them of its own act. But there they were in the heart of it, on 'change, amongst the merchants, who hurried up and down and chinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth, as Scrooge had seen them often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "No," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff-box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first with a yawn. "What's he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey-cock. "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know." This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," said the same speaker. "For upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer?" "I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. "But I must be fed if I make one." Another laugh. "Well, I am the most disinterested among you, after all," said the first speaker. "For I never wear black gloves, and I never eat lunch. But I'll offer to go if anyone else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not at all sure that I wasn't his most particular friend, for we used to stop and speak wherever we met. Bye-bye." Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men, and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided on into a street. Its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy, and of great importance. He had made a point always of standing well in their esteem, in a business point of view, that is, strictly in a business point of view. "How are you?" said one. "How are you?" returned the other. "Well," said the first, "old Scratch's got his own at last, eh?" "So I'm told," returned the second. "Cold, isn't it?" "Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose?" No, nothing else to think of. Good morning." Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial, but feeling assured that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what it was likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have any bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was the past, and his ghost province was the future. Nor could he think of any one immediately connected with himself to whom he could apply them. But nothing doubting that whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement, he resolved to treasure up every word he heard, and everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, for he had an expectation that the conduct of his future self would give him the clue he missed, and would render the solution of these riddles easy. He looked about in that very place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been resolving in his mind a change of life, and thought and hoped he saw his new-born resolutions carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom, with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand, and its situation in reference to himself, that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder, and feel very cold. They left the busy scene, and went into an obscure part of the town, where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation, and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and misery. Far in this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed, beetling shop, below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were brought. Upon the floor within were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting in among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself from the cold air without by a fussy curtaining of miscellaneous tatters, hung upon a line, and smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they all three burst into a laugh. "Let the charwoman alone be the first," cried she who had entered first. "Let the laundress alone to be the second, and let the undertaker's man alone to be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without cleaning it." "You couldn't have met me in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come into the parlour. You were made free of it a long time ago, you know, and the other two ain't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ugh, how it shrieks! How it squeaks! There aren't such a rusty bit of metal in the place as its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such old bones here as mine. We're all suitable to our calling. We're all well matched. Come into the parlour. Come into the parlour." The parlour was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man raked the fire together with an old stair-rod, and having trimmed his smoky lamp, for it was night, with the stem of his pipe, put it in his mouth again. While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, and looking with a bold defiance at the other two. What odds, then? What odds, Mr. Dilber? Said the woman. Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. That's true indeed, said the laundress. No man more so. Why then, don't stand staring at us as you was a... Why then, don't stand staring as if you was afraid, woman. Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. We should hope not. Very well, then, cried the woman. That's enough. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. No, indeed, said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, a wicked old screw, pursued the woman, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was stuck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. It's the truest word that was ever spoke, said Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment on him. I wish it were a little heavier judgment, replied the woman. And it would have been, you may depend upon it, if I could have laid my hands on anything else. Open that bundle, old Joe, and let me know the value of it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We know pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. It's no sin. Open the bundle, Joe. But the gallantry of her friends would not allow of this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up in a total when he found there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said Joe, and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I were to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next? Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you asked me for another penny, and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown. And now undo my bundle, Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains! You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there? Said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you'll certainly do it. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching it out, for the sake of such a man as he was, I promise you, Joe, said the woman coolly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Who else's, do you think? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take cold without 'em, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Said old Joe, stopping in his work and looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I ain't so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such things if he did. Ah, you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it, nor a threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call wasting of it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it ain't good enough for anything. It's quite as becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped round their spoil, In the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater, though they had been obscene demons, marketing the corpse itself. "Ha ha!" laughed the same woman when old Joe, producing a flannel bag with money in it, told out their several gains upon the ground. "This is the end of it, you see. He frightened every one away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead. Ha ha ha!" "Spirit," said Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced round it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. He thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it, but he had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. "O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, set up thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast at thy command, for this is thy dominion. But of the loved, revered, and honoured head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purposes, or make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart and pulse are still, but that the hand was open, generous and true, the heart brave, warm, and tender, and the pulse a man's. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound to sow the world with life immortal." No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked upon the bed. He thought if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost thoughts? Avarice, hard dealing, griping cares? They have brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word, I will be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in this room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. "Spirit," he said, "this is a fearful place. In leaving it, I shall not leave its lesson, trust me. Let us go." Still the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. "I understand you," Scrooge returned, "and I would do it if I could. But I have not the power, Spirit. I have not the power." Again it seemed to look upon him. "If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death," said Scrooge, quite agonized, "show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you." The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight, where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried but in vain to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voices of the children in her play, in their play. At length the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed, and which he struggled to repress. He sat down to the dinner that had been hoarding for him by the fire, and when she asked him faintly what news, which was not until after a long silence, he appeared embarrassed how to answer. "Is it good," she said, "or bad, to help him?" "Bad," he answered. "We are quite ruined?" "No, there is hope yet, Caroline." "If he relents," she said, amazed. "There is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened." "He is past relenting," said her husband. "He is dead." She was a mild and patient creature if her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear it, and she said so, with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness the next moment, and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. What that half-drunken woman whom I told you of last night said to me when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I thought was a mere excuse to avoid me, turns out to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then." "To whom will our debt be transferred?" "I don't know. But before that time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be a bad fortune indeed to find so merciless a creditor in his successor. We may sleep tonight with light hearts, Caroline." Yes. Soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. Their children's faces, hushed and clustered round to hear what they so little understood, were brighter, and it was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. "Let me see some tenderness connected with a death," said Scrooge, "or that dark chamber, spirit, which we left just now, will be forever present to me." The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. They entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And he took a child, and set him in the midst of them. Where had Scrooge heard these words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour hurts my eyes," she said. "The colour? Ah, poor Tiny Tim." "They're better now again," said Cratchit's wife. "It makes them weep by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." "Past it, rather," Peter answered, shutting up his book. "But I think he's walked a little slower than he used, these last few evenings, mother." They were very quiet again. At last she said, in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once, I've known him to walk away with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed." "So have I," cried Peter. "Often." "And so have I," exclaimed another. So had all. "But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work, "and his father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. Ah, and there's your father at the door." She hurried out to meet him, and little Bob and his comforter. He had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him on the hob, and they all tried who should help him to it most. Then the 2 young Cratchits got upon his knees and laid, each child, a little cheek against his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father. Don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table, and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday? You went today, then, Robert?" said his wife. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him I would walk there on a Sunday." "My little child," cried Bob. "My little child." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, he and his child would have been farther apart perhaps than they were. He left the room and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled to what had happened, and went down again quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and mother working still. Bob told them of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and seeing that he looked just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired what had happened to distress him. On which, said Bob, for he was the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard, I told him, "I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit," he said, "and heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how did he know that? How he ever knew that, I don't know." "Knew what, my dear?" "Why, that you were a good wife," replied Bob. "Everybody knows that." "Very well observed, my boy," cried Bob. "I hope they do." "Heartily sorry," he said, "for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way," he said, giving me his card, "that's where I live. Pray, come to me." "No, it wasn't," cried Bob. "For the sake of anything he might be able to do for us, so much as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. It really seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim, and felt with us." "I'm sure he's a good soul," said Mrs. Cratchit. "You would be surer of it, my dear," returned Bob, "if you saw and spoke to him. I shouldn't be at all surprised, mark what I say, if he got Peter a better situation." "Only hear that, Peter," said Mrs. Cratchit. "And then," cried one of the girls, "Peter will be keeping company with someone, and setting up for himself." "Get along with you," retorted Peter, grinning. "It's just as likely as not," said Bob. "One of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and whenever we part from one another, I'm sure we shall none of us forget poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that there was among us?" "Never, father!" cried they all. "And I know," said Bob, "I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient and how mild he was, although he was a little child, we shall not quarrel easily amongst ourselves, and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing it." "No, never, father!" they all cried again. "I'm very happy," said little Bob. "I'm very happy." Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, his daughters kissed him, the 2 young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. "Spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God." "Spectre," said Scrooge, "something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man was whom we saw lying dead." The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him, as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed no order in these latter visions, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of businessmen, but showed him not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, but went straight on, as to the end just now desired, until besought by Scrooge to tarry for a moment. "This court," said Scrooge, "through which we hurry now is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. I see the house. Let me behold what I shall be in days to come." The spirit stopped. The hand was pointed elsewhere. "The house is yonder," Scrooge exclaimed. "Why do you point away?" The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure in the chair was not himself. The phantom pointed as before. He joined it once again, and wondering why and whither he had gone, accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look round before entering. A churchyard. Here, then, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation's death, not life, choked up with too much burying, fat with repleted appetite. A worthy place. The spirit stood amongst the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw new meaning in its solemn shape. "Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me." The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave of his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I the man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "No, spirit. Oh, no, no!" The finger still was there. "Spirit!" he cried, tight clutching at its robe. "Hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." The kind hand trembled. "I will honour Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost.
Think he learned his lesson?
By God, if he didn't by this point, it's over. Because, Jeez.
Yeah, that was pretty rough with Tiny Tim. Catches you in the feels.
Get you a little bit.
So do you think all this happened, or do you think Scrooge just ate some bad cheese for dinner?
Just because it's happening inside his head, does that not mean that it is real?
Oh. Fair enough. Hey, Shelby.
Oh, yes.
Welcome.
Hello, Shelby.
McDuck at the gravestone. I don't remember the Disney one.
I watched it several times with Ramona. We've watched it so many times.
Oh, you have?
Oh, yeah.
I just, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe-
you know, Scrooge
Yeah, I've seen
McDuck, I remember it very well. Spirit. Oh, you can't, Spirit. Oh, no. Yeah. This Spirit also gives me Dementor vibes.
Oh, 100%.
Giving Dementor.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first thing I thought when I saw the
Mhm.
Dementors was it looked like the Ghost of Christmas Future.
Mm-hmm.
That the Muppets one, like, it used to creep me out when I was a kid.
The the one line did stand out to me where they were like where Scrooge was like it was at the very beginning where he's like he had become quite agreeable to the appearance of ghosts and was therefore not shaken when this one showed up or whatever it was. Okay, here we go.
Another ghost. Let's get it over with. Come on. Ghost cackling in the grave diggers.
This between the loss of Tiny Tim, and I'm sorry, I think Scrooge was in a little bit of denial because like it took him a lot. He had to see the gravestone before he could figure out that it was him that was dead.
Right? Who would the Ghost of Christmas Future be showing him visions of?
Right?
I don't know. Some dude's dead in his best shirt. He didn't notice the shirt.
Like the the way that everyone is reacting to his death. It's just kind of like he died and then everyone is just like dancing in the streets so happy. Everyone's so thrilled that he's dead. And like
Does this mean my debt's gone?
yeah. My debt can be wiped out. And then the others they like all stole his stuff and they're like,
Had some nice stuff. What are you gonna do?
we're gonna
He doesn't need it anymore.
no, we're gonna make some money off that. Just it reminds me of it's all your medical debt. Yeah. It reminds me of any scene in any animated movie where all the people are like dancing in the street and singing a song.
Just ding dong, the witch is dead.
Witch, old witch, the wicked witch, ding dong, the wicked witch is dead.
Pretty bad when the whole town kind of agrees.
And this is London too. You know, you ever live in London a lot, and they're all like, "F that guy." So glad he's dead.
That one guy.
That dude. Screw him.
Scrooge. Yeah, I don't ever. It kind of this chapter kind of catches you off guard because, like all the other chapters, there was a sense of humor behind it, but this one just went straight to
It was like
tragedy.
boom, sad. Right in there, right here, sad.
I guess somewhat humor with like talking about him being dead, like right there.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the funniness in it. I was
yeah.
like, this is kind of funny. They are talking mad. You know what? Right in front of his face.
Well, I don't know he's there.
Well, that's true. Melanie says, in one of the movie adaptations, Scrooge asks himself if he could have done something to prevent Tiny Tim's death. He said this reverberates with the recent murder of the healthcare CEO. That act raises up a lot of resentment towards the health insurance industry and how they deny claims and leave people to die.
Getting a little political here. Charles Dickens foretold the future.
A good point, though.
Yeah.
A good point. I think that's because the themes are timeless, because the rich be screwing the poor over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah, there's always going to be a wealth gap. Been since the beginning of time. From that one person who had more, I don't know, meat than the other person.
More.
I caught a bigger deer, therefore I have more to trade.
I killed the woolly mammoth, so therefore I get more. Blah, blah,
exactly.
Blah. Greed is infinite. Well, if you ask Gordon Gekko, greed is good.
I think to a degree, maybe, but no. Greed is like necessary, because like being like generous and philanthropic is only beneficial when like everyone does it.
Yeah.
Like if everyone agrees and is on board, like that's like true prosperity.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be that one douche nozzle who like takes advantage of it and ruins it for everyone.
That's humanity. Humanity sucks. I think Fred's attitude, I don't know if it matters so much whether or not he knows Scrooge is dead. I think Fred's attitude is, well, no, I think he does know that Scrooge is dead, and he's always felt bad for Bob Cratchit, and I think he's like, look, man, if I can help you out in any way, like your boss just died and all this, I think he's like saying, like, look, I got you. I'll help you if you need it.
Yeah.
Galaxy says, I find it interesting that nobody feels bad for the CEO. Nobody is particularly happy that he was murdered, but nobody is disturbed by it either. Oh no, I think some people are happy he was murdered.
I find it interesting that like people think that anyone would be
upset,
like upset or feel bad. Not even for the fact that he was like one of the most evil CEOs and corrupt people around, but just like how many murders are there on like a daily basis that you never hear about? No one really cares. Like, why is this guy different?
Yep, it's the Jean Benet effect.
Like, yeah, it's just, I don't know. One of those things where
it's 100% the Jean Benet effect. It's exactly what it is. But in this story,
I mean, that's kind of how I felt about it. Like, I read about it and I was just like, oh, okay. And then I moved on. Like, it wasn't anything that stuck with me. Like,
that wasn't my reaction. That was not my reason at all.
I was like, oh, okay, he got killed.
Nope, that was not my reaction. I don't know if I should.
What's the next article on my feed? Let's read the next
one.
Nope,
that was not my reaction.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I didn't like care. That was the thing.
I know you're working through them.
Yeah. How many chapters were there? I'm on like chapter 14 or something like that.
He's working through the editing, and then he's working through the editing, and then once he edits them, I have to go through and like re-record any like bad audio or anything maybe I mispronounced or whatever when I was reading it. And then he adds those in, and then we can release them. So he is working on it. I don't know if you have a time frame, but I know you're plugging away.
I don't want to give it a time frame because it has been a hot minute, but I am working on it.
But I mean, a hot minute was, it is also the holidays right now. So that's like makes things harder. We are working
That's
on
true.
them
Like
though.
most of the editing I did get done was like from the course of when we finished it to like right before Thanksgiving. And like this month, I really haven't done much on it.
But we are working on them. They're not just gonna like not be available for people to just listen to as an audiobook. They'll be out there.
I'm just trying to get them all done and then release as one big audiobook rather than pieces.
The new CEO is saying he is going to still strive against unnecessary care.
Shocked, but not that shocked.
Yeah. Willful ignorance.
CEO is gonna CEO.
Yep. I want to say so many things, guys, and I feel like I really can't. But I have a lot of thoughts about all this.
Let's stick with how it pertains to Christmas Carol and Scrooge. Let's not dive so deep.
That's why I'm like, I want to talk about it.
Maybe
but
you
I
should
can't
make
talk
your
about
own
it.
like side political channel where you can talk about that stuff.
Maybe we should. Maybe we should just do a political.
Well, you can. You're much more ingrained in that. I try to avoid it where I can.
Okay, maybe we do a side channel where I rant about everything all the time.
I feel like politics are a necessary thing. I try to avoid it in my free time.
Part of me just is always trying to like bite my tongue about politics because that's just not what the channel is. But I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of things, and I could say a lot of things. And then I don't know, people might get upset. So maybe we should just read the next chapter.
Read the next chapter, the end of it.
The end of it. Let's finish this story before my voice gives out.
Well, no, I agree, Melanie. And like 90% of everything we do is political. But that's just why I said, like, in my free time, I try not to think about that stuff. Because that's like, everyday life. Try to escape that.
All right, everyone, here we go. Stave 5. The end of it. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. Oh my God. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. "They are not torn down," cried Scrooge, folding one of his bed curtains in his arms. "They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will." His hands were busy with his garments all this time, turning them inside out, putting them on upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties to every kind of extravagance. "I don't know what to do," cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath, and making a perfect Laocoon of himself with his stockings. "I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I am giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there. Whoop! Hello! He had frisked into the sitting room and was now standing there, perfectly winded. "There's the saucepan that the gruel was in!" cried Scrooge, starting off again and going round the fireplace. "There's the door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley appeared. There's the corner where the ghost of Christmas present sat. There's the window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right. It's all true. It all happened. Ah! Ah! Ah!" Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long line of brilliant laughs. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I have been amongst the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello! Whoop! Hello there!" He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell. Bell, dong, ding, hammer, clash, clang, clash. Oh, glorious, glorious! Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold, cold, piping for the blood to dance in, golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Oh, glorious, glorious! "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about him. "Eh?" returned the boy with all his might of wonder. "What's today, my fine fellow?" said Scrooge. "Today?" replied the boy. "Why, Christmas Day." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow." "Hello," returned the boy. "Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one at the corner?" Scrooge inquired. "I should hope I did," replied the lad. "An intelligent boy," said Scrooge. "A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one." "What, the one as big as me?" returned the boy. "What a delightful boy," said Scrooge. "It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck." "It's hanging there now," replied the boy. "Is it?" said Scrooge. "Go and buy it." "Walk, exclaimed the boy. "No, no," said Scrooge. "I'm in earnest. Go and buy it and tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown." The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have got a shot off so fast. "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. "He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Joe Miller never made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be." The hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. "I shall love it as long as I live," cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. "I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Here's the turkey. Hello, whoop! How are you? Merry Christmas!" It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. He would have snapped 'em short off in a minute like sticks of sealing wax. "Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town," said Scrooge. "You must have a cab." The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again, and chuckled till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had to cut off, but he have Oh my God. But if he had cut off the bit. Why? But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him. Scrooge regarded every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that 3 or 4 good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." And Scrooge said often afterwards that of all the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when, coming towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before, and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met, but he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace, and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, "how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." "Mr. Scrooge?" "Yes," said Scrooge. "That is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness—" Here Scrooge whispered in his ear. "Lord bless me!" cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" "If you please," said Scrooge. "Not a farthing less. And great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favour?" "My dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, I don't know what to say to such money for—" "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me. Will you come and see me?" "I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. "Thank ye," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times. Bless you." He went to church, and walked about the streets, and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted children on the head, and questioned beggars, and looked down into the kitchens of houses, and up to the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything, could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. "Nice girl. Very." "Yes, sir." "Where is he, my love?" said Scrooge. "He's in the dining-room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." "Thank you. He knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining-room lock. "I'll go in here, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his face in, round the door. They were looking at the table, which was spread out in great array, for these young housekeepers are always nervous on such points, and like to see that everything is right. "Fred!" said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece by marriage started. Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with the footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in? It is a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity. Wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had his heart set upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. A quarter past. No Bob. He was full 18 and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door open, wide open, that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off, too, before he opened the door, his comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen, as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," said Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob, appearing from the tank. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. "I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool and giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back into the tank again, "and therefore, I am about to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him and calling to the people in the court for help and a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fire and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, borough, in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins, as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with the spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of all of us. May that bunging up the very friggin' end of the thing. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
No, I think that read that Scrooge became a second father to Tiny Tim.
Yeah.
Not Tiny Tim becoming a dad.
That would be a wild...
I mean, maybe someday.
But what a... Yeah, no.
No, this was Victorian times, but like, geez, let him have his childhood.
Yeah, right? Dan said, things Biggs has to edit out. You don't even know.
I've been multiple times seeing Bob McDuck going to their house. Yeah, I think Scrooge goes to their house in the Muppets movie too.
I think there are quite a few adaptations where he like just shows up with the turkey at the house.
Yeah.
And then they do like he like puts Tiny Tim on his lap and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could see why you would do that in like a visual format versus like how it's written here. Because I feel like in a visual format, you can kind of condense it all into like him going and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easier that way.
Also, Scrooge, one last moment of being a dick with Bob Cratchit.
I know.
Give him a heart attack.
I know. I love that where Scrooge is like, I'm going to pretend to be a dick and then tell him I'm going to give him a raise. It's going to be so funny. And it scares the poor man so much that he is almost going to like send him to the insane asylum.
Right? That would be great. I'm going to give you a raise. Just like smacks him with a stick.
Right?
Just calls the cops.
Yeah. There's something wrong with him. He wants to give me more money. This is not right.
Never said how much, though.
I mean, I'm assuming probably
Yeah, I'm assuming.
good
I was
amount.
just saying. Could flip that back, You get 1 penny more a week.
Give you an extra shilling. Maybe, and if we don't earn enough profits, I won't give you a bonus, but I'll give you a pizza party.
Bob, we're going to have a pizza party. What's pizza?
Ay.
When was pizza invented?
Now that I have read this story, I can honestly say it was awesome. I loved it.
It was pretty great, yeah.
It was really good. I liked it. It was very funny. I love the tongue-in-cheek of the language.
It was nice revisiting it now after having a break. My childhood, this was like a yearly thing. We'd go see the play and stuff. I was just so sick of this story.
I could see it when you're going to see the play every time, and just over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
And as a kid, I watched the Muppets movie, and then I have to go see a play. Like, which is better?
Yeah.
There are no Muppets in this. Why do I want to watch it?
Right, fair. Yes, this was my first time ever reading it. I've never read this before.
Really?
Yeah, we talked about this at the beginning. Like, I've never read this story before.
I remember you saying you didn't have a hard copy. I didn't realize you never read the
I've
story
never
at all.
physically read this before, no.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of surprising considering what a classic it is.
I know. This was a dry read. Whole thing was a dry read.
Pretty good for a dry read.
Thanks.
But
I liked
what
it.
Are we
It was
gonna
really
read
good.
next?
I don't know. So Melanie threw in the suggestion of The Gift of the Magi and The Grinch, but I don't think The Grinch is in the public domain, so I don't think we could actually get away with reading The Grinch.
Yeah, I think Dr. Seuss was.
I think he's
Dr.
still
Seuss
copyrighted
is in like outside of the U.S., but the U.S. has that like extension.
I know, because we're awesome like that.
So Seuss is gonna be a little bit longer. Just like Lord of the Rings is gonna be like public domain for most of the world in like 2040, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I've never read The Gift of the Magi. I'd be down to read that. Santa Claus Conquers the Martians.
Yes.
The Martians kidnap Santa because there is nobody on Mars to give their children presents. That sounds like a good story.
That sounds great.
Let's see. What else is in the public domain? Christmas Carol. Oh, these are all, I think, actual books. I mean, The Nutcracker. Somebody also suggested The Nutcracker.
Never read that. We've only seen the musicals.
The
movies are faithful enough. Yeah, I agree. I was actually surprised reading through this just how faithful the movies are.
I mean, it's a pretty short story, and the elements are so, like, the themes and the elements are so blunt, and the visuals are pretty just, like, straightforward that you can hit all the beats without having to cut things.
That hasn't stopped filmmakers in the past.
I mean, I know. That's very true. Let's see. What do we got? A Visit from St. Nicholas.
I want to do the Alien.
The
Alien one.
I know. I figured.
You really let off with a banger. Now everything else just...
You just want to read the Martians kidnap Santa Claus?
Yes.
I mean, I definitely think we could read this one. The Gift of the Magi. I think we read that for sure. Santa Claus conquers the Martians. Like, what is this?
I would say it was a fanfic, but
It's a movie.
oh, it's not a
book. It's a movie. The 1964 science fiction film that regularly appears on lists of the worst movies ever made. Probably pretty terrible.
It sounds awful, but that's what I want.
Well, it's not a book. I'm sorry, it's not a book.
We can read the script.
Let's plan on the Gift of the Magi, and we'll go from there.
All right.
I'm sorry, we can't. I can't.
I'll play some parts. You play some parts. It'll be fine.
I mean, Melanie, we're probably gonna peace out in a minute anyway.
Yeah.
So you're good. I don't know as we're gonna hang around for too much longer. So
That's true. Some Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen stories.
that's true. We tell you what. We'll put the Gift of the Magi on there for sure. And then we will do some research and come up with some other things. And if anyone else has any other suggestions, put them in the Discord. They just have to be in the public domain, because we would like to not get copyright striked. Please.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of Christmas stuff.
I'm sure there is.
Charles Dickens has to have some other short stories.
Oh, I'm sure he does, yeah. Yeah, this was great. I loved it. It was awesome. It was funny. Really great lessons, really great themes. Really enjoyed it.
Definitely a solid classic.
Which bit's your favorite bit?
I don't know if I had an exact favorite part, but I did like the like grumpy Scrooge early on, like the first few chapters, with just like Dickens digs at Scrooge and his descriptions of him.
I think those are also my favorite. I thought you were for sure gonna say the glowing lobster. Oh my god.
Well, yeah.
Reddit Ask Science Christmas question. A bad lobster in a dark cellar. What does it mean? I am rereading Dickens' A Christmas Carol. There is a line where it says, "It was not in penetrable shadow as the other objects in the yards were, but had a dismal light about it like a bad lobster in a dark cellar." What does this mean? Do lobsters have bioluminescence when they start to go bad? Would they glow for some other reason? Do they glow at all? Oh, you're not the only one.
I was going to say, that's exactly like word for word what I asked in the last stream. Is there an answer, or are we just...
This person apparently says bioluminescent microbes, which are naturally found in seawater, will grow on rotting shellfish if the conditions are just right. The pale blue light they produce is very faint, can only be seen in a very dark place, like a cold storage cellar. Glowing lobster is lobster that has started to go bad.
So it actually glows.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we know.
So if your lobster is
Thank you,
glowing,
random Reddit user.
your lobster is glowing blue, don't eat it.
I think that just pertains to any food. If it's glowing blue, just don't eat it.
Yeah, I think that's solid advice. That's probably good. But yeah, I don't know if I really have anything else to add other than I really liked it. It was good. I'm glad I read it.
Yeah, and we learned something about lobsters.
And we learned something about lobsters. Always learning things on this channel. Good stuff.
I do want to try it now, though. Get a lobster and just let it sit.
God. The cats will eat it.
Then their tongues will be glowing blue. Be awesome.
Or they'll...
Actually, that'd probably be terrifying. Imagine
Oh,
just a
fermented
dark room.
lobster. Oh, that sounds terrible. That's horrible.
Don't yuck someone's yums. They do fermented fish and stuff. They do fermented shark in Iceland.
Oh, then they have that lutefisk, the fish in the... Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Nothing wrong with a little fermented seafood.
Oh, sorry, I got a cold chill.
I've never had fermented fish or anything, though.
I remember Gordon Ramsay was not really into it.
Did he try it?
Mm.
Oh, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm starting to get really tired, though.
Yeah, I have to eat. So I say we wrap this up for now and give us some more recommendations in the Discord. We will let you know when we are going to stream again, and we'll figure out what we're going to do. Gift of the Magi for sure, and maybe a couple other things.
See what we can get in before Christmas.
Yeah. Have a good night, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. We'll see y'all soon.